Got it. Sashi Bagi Juji Medo Tan
Yin,
Riva Lechi Ninde Gemba Dia Sange Shindu Mide Uwagi Toku Nanda Jinga Chuba Chu Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kamne Yadayami Sange Chudan Sugi Jonam La Janchu Badu Dani Gazu Jia Dagi Juji Gibe Sunangi Dola Benche Sange Tuba Shu Sangye Jodan Sogi Jonam La Janju Badu Dani Gazu Jia Dagi Juji Gibe Sunangi Dola Benche Sange Tuba Shu Sangye Jodan Sogi Jonam La Janju Badu Dani Gazu Jia Dagi Juji Gibe Sunangi Dola Benche Sange Tuba Shu. So, as you may remember, we left off with verse 30. we just we took some time, verse 30, because it gets at what Nagarjuna um, thought we all should know as we study this very important subject. To seekers of reality at first, you should declare everything exists. Once they understand things and grow detached, then you may teach them freedom. So that's how this was translated. And so this is a big deal, actually, because if you look at most philosophies, they fall on one side or another of correct view, according to Nagarjuna. Um, like, let's take typical. I respect all religions as long as people are practicing them in a respectful and helpful manner. um, to each their own and provolone. But if you get into the philosophy part of it, most religious views go to some sort of essence that lasts eternally. I fell into this when I started studying Buddhism. Like I heard about rebirth, and I kept imagining some form of Wilson taking a future birth, which is actually not how it is at all to Buddhist ideas. Um, Everything right now about Wilson is going to decay and fall apart. My body, my a lot of my memories, stuff is going to go. And when we die, our body and mind go through a dissolution process until it looks like almost nothing is left. Almost nothing, right? According to the Buddhist point of view, a very subtle part of the mind that has been with us since beginningless time will continue forward. But even that most subtle aspect of consciousness depends on the previous moment of consciousness to produce it. So it too is dependent. And based on causes and conditions, it's going to reform to make a whole new you and a whole new me based on causes and conditions that we have created. That's the Buddhist point of view. And so each moment, as we think, as we feel, as we react, we're planting seeds in the continuum of our mind that eventually will grow, take root, and form what we become. So, whatever the most potent seed is when we die is going to shape our next existence, for better or worse, depending on what it is. This is quite a frightening prospect for most of us to kind of realize, oh my goodness, it's like playing roulette with your future existence, which is why Buddhists are so into practice, study, trying to use the last moment of life for deepening of practice so that we can have some control over where our future is going. Um, so, anyway, the typical spiritual view of, oh, I've got an eternal soul, so I don't have to worry. God will save me at the last minute and clean off all my problems, and I'll be good. It's helpful at one level from a Buddhist point of view. The way that that's helpful is that when we're dying, if we do appeal to a higher force, something good, I hope, not a negative force, but something positive, then we're calling up the best part of our psyche and our actions throughout our life and calling that to shape what we become. That's good. That's helpful from a Buddhist point of view. Um, the idea that, and I don't know, I hope I don't step on anybody's toes, but one idea that's been floating around in Christian schools of thought is that it's not your deeds that are important, but whether or not you have faith. And so if you lead a terrible life and you screw over everybody and kill people and whatever, all you need is one moment of faith and then you're good. And God will say, okay, you're clean. Come on in. Welcome to heaven. And so you can lead a terrible life and hope for eternal well-being. Uh, I'm going to call BS from a Buddhist point of view. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. It's not that it's a bad thing to seek to purge your negativity. In fact, if any of you watched Gyumi Khenso Rinpoche earlier today, he said the reason that Buddhists confess the same things again and again and again is not only to purify it, because it takes a lot to purify it, but also because doing so reminds us of our direction. And it reminds us of our vows and what direction we're going, and it makes our spiritual path more solid. So, anyway, that's one extreme. The extreme of eternalism is that, oh, I've got this pure soul that I don't have to do anything. It's just going to be the best version of Wilson every time in the future. And so that's not how things are, according to Nagarjuna. Um, the other extreme is nihilism, which is where people easily go, and that's what Nagarjuna is really cautioning us about in this verse. Because if you start right out by saying, hey, in reality, since we're all dependently arisen, there's no real self nature to anything, then what somebody who doesn't really understand it will do is they'll fall over into nihilism. Well, nothing exists, so why put in effort into spiritual practice? Which is what Nagarjuna gets into in the next verse. Why is that a tragedy from a Buddhist point of view? Um, I'll go into the English first, and then I'm going to go into the Tibetan. Ignorant of the meaning of freedom, just acting on what they have heard, they neglect the exercise of virtue. Such pitiful creatures are lost. So that's nihilism. If we fall into that extreme, it can destroy our spiritual progress. And I'll go over to the Tibetan so you can take a look at this in the Tibetan. Here we go. Okay. So for those of you who don't read Tibetan, don't worry, I'll sound it out and say what it means. But you can see where my cursor here is on verse 31. Nampar when, Nampar when, Nampar means thoroughly, and when means isolation. And so the translator put that as freedom. Um, what it really means is that when Buddha taught that things do not have self nature, The Buddha included Buddha doesn't have self nature. No aspect of reality anywhere has self nature. Nothing has ever, from beginningless time, had self nature. Ain't no thing. There's nothing there anywhere. And that's the meaning of thorough isolation. What happens is the mind fabricates images of reality, of ourselves, and of reality. And so we have this rich fantasy life of ourselves and the world and all the different people in the world. And unfortunately, if we're not yet thoroughly trained, we impute self nature into those images of ourselves and our world as if they exist inherently from their own side. And that internal concoction starts to become the place where we create karma. I'll just call up the image again of the wheel of existence. So that's in the wheel, these are the 12 links of dependent origination. That's this first link here of the blind man with the cane stumbling through life. Right? And that's what that ignorance, there are two levels of it, as you've heard me say before. There's um, a relative level of ignorance that doesn't know what causes what. We know we're here. We have a vague idea that our parents at some point had sex. And that's how our bodies came to be, right? But we can't really, most of us cannot remember that process nor understand all the complex causes of our biological existence and what keeps it going. Kind of know we have to eat, sleep, drink water. Um, but the complexities of it are beyond us. Who here has total control over your biology? Not me. It happens. I wish I could control it because sometimes it really is very difficult what it does to us, right? Same with our minds. Where did our mind come from? What causes it? Exactly. Scientists are totally boggled. They think it's some interaction of neurons firing, but they're like, last read I had something like 32 different sub schools of materialist views of the mind. They're all fighting each other. So they can't figure it out. They can't figure out where the mind came from and where it's going. So, anyway, that's a relative level of ignorance that most of us are saddled with. We don't know. On a deeper level, and this gets into the Buddhist view of why we're still suffering, there's an inherent clinging that we have to our aggregates, our body, feeling, discernment, compositional factors, awareness of sensory and mental awareness. There's an inherent sense of defining that as as a self. That's a me. And it can be different levels. I have these aggregates. It's my body, my feelings, my thoughts, right? Or that somehow these aggregates hold a self within them. Um, and so that is the word for it in Tibetan is Jiktengi, um, Jiktengi Da, Jiktengi Dawa, the view of the perishable assemblage. So, Tibetans love, like you've probably heard the name Punsok. Tibetans will give their kids the name Punsok, which means a good collection. And it's hard to think of ourselves that way, but really, aren't we? Like, we all start out this little embryo, and then depending on what we eat and lots of different factors, our bodies form. But everything about our bodies was borrowed from somewhere else. The embryo itself was borrowed from our parents and their substances, right? Then, as we got outside the womb, then our moms or somebody started feeding us stuff, and we incorporated that into our bodies. And so everything that we say about my body came from somewhere else, something else, someone else. There's nothing from its own side that exists without depending on many different factors. It's an assemblage, isn't it? We have our cardiovascular system, our limbic system, our pulmonary system, our digestive, all sorts of different systems interacting, and we don't have any control over any of that. It arises dependently. Um, so the ignorance that clings to all that as if it's a solid me and I'm in control. I'm in control. Um, that's the basis for lots of problems. And actually, I'll read you some of them from Judd Kirke's commentary to this verse. Um, okay, so, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself in terms of the commentary. Um, but because of this, um, well, because I ventured into it, I'll tell you a few of the problems with that point of view. First of all, that point of view of there's a solid me here leads to a solid sense of mind. And then that basic supposition of an inherent me and mind leads to clinging. And basically, that's driven by um, lots of these aggregates, but it's actually over here at the bottom, the guy with the arrow in his eye. um, that's feeling. Zorwa. Zorwa is like the king of the mind, what we feel. Is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? And so as we get a sense of, oh, it feels good, then we cling to that and we pursue it, whatever it is. And there, because of different karmas, people have a lot of different sense of what gives them pleasure, right? And so we start clinging and chasing after what we think we want. And that turns from initial craving, here's a guy drinking a beer, not bad, into strong craving. There's a monkey clinging to a tree, trying to get the fruit in the tree. And then as that comes to a head, whatever we cling to the most takes us into becoming. That takes us into what we're going to become. And here's a pregnant woman about to give birth. So anyway, there are lots of links I didn't talk about, but all of them depend on this first link. If we have that ignorance clinging to an inherent self, then not only do we create afflictions, but we create karma. And that's the second link here is a guy with a pottery wheel making different things out of clay. That karma shapes what we're going to become. And we can't turn it off. As long as we have this ignorance and we're stumbling along blind every moment of every day, each moment can be divided into smaller moments, and each of those creates its own initial karma. And so we're like storehouses of karmic formation. And all of those can give their own separate effects over lifetimes. And so that's why the Buddhist view, it can scare you, but the supposition is that it's actually a correct view of how things are. So Buddha didn't start by attacking that inaccurate sense of me and mine. He didn't start there because he saw that if he started there, many people would get the wrong idea and think, okay, so this self that I'm clinging to doesn't exist. Buddha's saying it doesn't exist. So why take care of my future lives? They don't exist either. Or why be careful about karma? What does that have? There's nothing to it. It's not real. And so that mistaken notion um, causes beings who hear it and who don't think accurately to not take care of their karma. And he goes on here, Nambar Wen Dun, the meaning of thorough isolation. Mishe means not understanding it. So somebody who initially hears about emptiness and doesn't correctly understand what the Buddha is getting at, to that person, tupa some, they tend to just take what they heard and towards that, whatever it was, like maybe they hear a snippet from the Heart Sutra, no ears, no nose. Maybe they hear a little snippet like that. Jukje, they enter into that thought and they act on it. They enter into whatever their mistaken notion is of voidness and they start acting on it. Gandak, such persons, sunam, their virtuous actions, mijepa, they don't do them. They don't see the point of collecting virtue and purifying the non-virtues within their minds because they don't. And I've heard this from people who don't really understand it. And there's, oh, karma doesn't exist. Well, that's completely wrong. That's a really big misunderstanding of the Buddhist teachings. And what happens? Yebu, such persons, dasha. Dasha means inferior or evil or degraded. Dedak, those kinds of lab practices, activities. And so this used to happen, unfortunately, in Tibet. There was a problem with this at the time of Tsongkhapa. There was a big cutoff between yogis and scholars. And the scholars were called Senyipa, those who go by logic and debate, and the yogis were thought of as practitioners. But um, there was a misunderstanding in Tibet that the two were diametrically opposed. And so one group thought that, okay, the Sanipas or the scholars, they just are so cautious about their karma and they're always trying to do the right thing and they're really intellectual and they're never going to find enlightenment that way. That was the bold Jorpas, the yogis, who were kind of taking that stance. And then over on the other camp, the Sanipas, the scholars and um, debaters, and logicians, would shake their heads and go, "Oh, those decrepit Jorpas, they really don't know how to practice properly, and they think they're going to find enlightenment, but they're just creating a hell for themselves." And so the thought was those two couldn't mix. The Neljorpas were very much just practice. Don't study, just practice. You've probably heard that. Have you heard that attitude? You know, it gets expressed sometimes in Buddhist circles. So what happened is Tsongkhapa studied very deeply, but at the same time he practiced very deeply. And all of his works started refuting those two extremes of viewpoints. And one good image for it, I think it was one of the Panchen Lamas who said, trying to practice without study is like a rock climber with no legs. Trying to practice without, trying to attain enlightenment without practice is like a mountain climber with no hands. Right? And so you need both. You need to understand things correctly. Um, or, if you do not understand the teachings on emptiness correctly, it's going to lead you here to somebody whose practices are corrupt and really not helping them at all. And in fact, maybe leading them into a really bad direction. So, for that reason, Buddha started by saying, hey, there's this thing called suffering. Here's what causes it. It can be ended. Here's a path. These are true. These exist. And once you get that, then as you start to practice and study over time, you start to realize that if I've been cycling in and out of existence since beginningless time, and I've been suffering nonstop, and nothing has any permanent nature to it, why am I clinging to this? Why am I clinging to the samsaric pleasures when really samsara is like one big burning bonfire? There's no place in it that's going to give me comfort. I don't know if any of you have had this occur to you as you're practicing, but my goodness, at my age, it becomes very evident as people around me get sick and die, who I've known my whole life. And I watch the news and see all the tragedy everywhere. It's like there's nowhere in samsara where you can put your outpost and say, okay, I'm safe here. I'm outside of the fray here. Right? This place is beyond being touched. It's all suffering. And so when that occurs to you at a deep level, then that's the time to start to learn the teachings on emptiness or start to put them into practice because that's how one transcends the cycle of suffering. Why is that? Just going back to the diagram for a moment. If everything is caused by that misunderstanding, grasping at me and mine, and that's what begins karmic formation and all the things that come out of karmic formation, then what happens when you dispel that? When there is no more ignorance, then you're totally awake to how things are. Then you're not creating causes for this whole round of existence. And that's where Nagarjuna is going in his next verse. So let me get there. Lenam is karma. Drebu is effects. Chenula with those. Droa Dakyang, those beings in the world. Yang Dak She, Buddha taught those things as really existing. Karma and its effects. Dei Rangshin Yongshen Dang. By those things, when somebody understands their nature thoroughly, Gewa Mepa Dakyang Den, then somebody's ready for the teachings on non-arising. And, and basically, that's the teachings on emptiness. So,
Wilson,
yeah,
I have a question about that kind of especially since from what I can see that there is more suffering everywhere, including in our country. And especially in other countries. Uh, and I don't know if I just became aware of it or whatever, but um how does that really, really relate to emptiness? Because it's something that I feel it every day.
yeah.
And I do compassion prayers and stuff like that, for beings and stuff. But I just like to know, I guess I didn't really understand how it relates, like you're ready for emptiness.
Well, Jimmy Rinpoche again today, he always addresses things that are on my mind when I listen to him. So today he was talking about when you're trying to help beings, the best way to help them is taking care of their needs here and now and also into the future, right? That if you can help them here and now, but you really can't help them for the future, it's still good, but it's not as good as helping them now and into their future lives. If by helping them right now, it's going to cause a bigger problem down the line for them, then maybe it's best not to help them in that way. And I'll give you an example. Somebody comes to you and says, my neighbor is a creep. They're trying to take my property. Here's a gun. Would you go shoot them? It would really help me out. Then you know as a Buddhist, well, that might give them a temporary respite from their neighbor, but that would create a cause that would send them into a terrible place, and me as well, and the neighbor as well, right? And so there are some actions that you know not to enter into. However, the point that Rinpoche made, if you sit on your cushion and you wish every being in the world happiness and the ultimate forms of happiness, but then this person sitting next to you needs your help, and you're like, oh, I don't have time to help you now because I have to mentally take care of all beings. Then you missed the point. That really where helping beings begins is with whoever we're with. And by helping whoever we're with and whoever connects to us, and they help whoever they're with, and it extends out that way. And so those contemplations are very useful, where you realize the suffering of the world.
Yeah,
And
well, that and I just realized interconnectedness. That's,
yeah,
we should be constantly in some kind of state of interconnectedness, even if it's not pleasant.
as for how does emptiness help?
Yes, that's the
Um,
question.
so when you meet a really good lama or teacher, whoever they are, have you noticed that they're always at peace? And you tell your problems to them. And if you ever have this experience with Gyume Khenso Rinpoche, he'll giggle. And it's not a sadistic giggle at your problems, right? But it's a little giggle like, okay, this is workable. No need to be too worried, right? Like a reassuring giggle. Um, and basically, when somebody has freed themselves, he was going into it today. Actually, he was talking about how the Buddha, over three countless eons, did nothing but take care of all beings, never generating any anger about it or afflictions, but doing that with his whole being, sometimes even giving away his life or doing whatever was needed. Never got proud, never got arrogant, never lorded himself over others like I'm so much superior to you, right? And that kind of humility really comes when you see that there ain't no thing, that really there's no Wilson here, really. It's really a name that my parents put on a forming set of aggregates. And then through the luck of the draw, the being called Wilson got enough nurturing and support that I could grow old and lose my hair, right? But all of that was totally dependent. Could have ended up anywhere in any condition, any being. And so the more I think somebody properly understands emptiness, the more they see that, as you said, we're all interdependent, that there, except for karma, go I, that helping beings. They've all been my moms. My helping beings is a natural expression of that wisdom that sees that we're all dependent and they're all going through this together. And it also cuts the formation of the afflictions of mind. When you dwell on that lack of substantial existence in yourself and your aggregates and all beings, there's no room for the afflictions to arise. There's no anchor for them to arise. And so by staying with it, your mind eventually becomes peaceful. Those afflictions of mind get extinguished, your compassion increases, and you become that smiling being who, when people come to with their problems, gives comfort and knows how to help them. And so that's how the meditation on emptiness helps. It liberates you from your own suffering and your own causes of suffering. And eventually it becomes um, widespread enough that you can understand beings and where they're coming from and what they need. And you can respond exactly to what they need. So, anyway, it's a good thing. It's actually the wisdom that liberates us. The renunciation starts to get us out of the constant clinging to this phantasm of a world. The bodhicitta gets us out of our self-cherishing and into cherishing others so that we can widen our hearts and help beings and start taking on widespread activities. And then it's the wisdom that liberates us from our afflictions as well as the obstacles to knowledge that get in the way of helping others. So when you understand it that way, it's healthy. But if you misunderstand it, you think, oh, there's no rhyme or reason to anything, then that's nihilism. And that's not at all what Nagarjuna is teaching here. Um, all right, so
Wilson,
yeah,
I was thinking that I've had this realization lately that I don't think that there's more suffering. I think I'm finally understanding suffering. That, I always remember that first teaching about my mother at a cage, you know, rushing down the river of pus and blood, bound and gagged. And I was so scared, then 15 years later, I wasn't as scared, but I think that I don't know that there is more suffering, or is it that I'm actually understanding it? That it's all suffering, good, bad, indifferent, and I feel like I'm as close to renunciation as I've ever been, full renunciation,
well,
and
that's what it,
and then I wonder, I get my feelings hurt, and then I realize, wait, what's getting their feelings hurt?
who
It takes
exactly
it
is
sometimes.
it that,
Sometimes it takes an hour or so, but it's like, wait a minute, wait, Miss Buddhist practitioner, what's getting her feelings hurt?
well, that's what happens with practice. And that's how you
Yeah,
know you're making progress.
yes,
Um, because in reality, the world, I think Buddha was correct. The unenlightened world is a world of suffering. And he taught the causes and he said, you don't have to suffer. And here's how, right? How to get out of it. And I think those four truths, the more you study and practice, the more aware of them you become. It's not that they go away. These are truths of the Aryas, which means these are truths of beings who have woken up and seen for themselves how reality is. And so it's a sign of progress when you get that renunciation. It's very uncomfortable, right? But it gets into the three forms of suffering. There's overt suffering, the suffering of change, when something we think is good is goes bad on us or we lose it, right? And then the suffering of conditioned existence. And for bodhisattvas who practice a long time, it's that third suffering. It's so subtle, most people never notice it. But that sense that everything about me in this world is conditioned by contaminated causes and effects, that becomes unbearable. And so the bodhisattva starts to get very firm renunciation of, I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to live within the confines of conditioned existence. I want to be free of that. And that's where real renunciation is. And that puts you on the path of really trying to undermine that ignorance that's driving the whole show so that you can wake up. And there is comfort in it when you start to perfect meditation and you start to have a sense of emptiness. There's a lot of hopefulness there.
And the realization that you really can help.
Right. And that
That's
your mind has that potential to awaken thoroughly and to go beyond suffering. And that in itself is amazingly powerful. The mind does not have to be trapped by the afflictions. It's not powerless against them. Um, so anyway, it does get better, I promise. Or the Buddha promises. But we have to go through the renunciation to really get ourselves on the right path. Um, so, okay. So Rinpoche in his commentary, Gyimekhen Rinpoche gets into that's why the Bodhisattva vow not to teach emptiness to the untrained is so important because you want to nurture somebody to the point where they start to get a taste of renunciation and bodhicitta, and they have a correct view of dependent arising and emptiness and how they relate to each other. And then at that point, if you go into depth, that can actually free them and help them in their path. All right, so this one, Gompa, is the intention. Wangi, by that intention, Yawanam, the victorious ones, with that intention to um, get their trainees into the true renunciation, true bodhicitta, some discipline over their karmic actions in their mind. With that intent in mind, uh, they said, Nga Dang Yi She. She means they said. Sung means they taught. Dar means like that. So, with the intention of teaching the Four Truths, Buddha would talk about me and mine in a relative sense, because in a relative sense, there is such a thing. I was talking about getting the name Wilson before I was cognizant of being named, right? And for all I knew, I didn't know where I was, but I was existing moment to moment, having just endured birth and being nurtured, thank goodness, by a loving parent, loving parents. But within that state, um, the Buddha, when he taught about me and mine, it was so that people like me and like you have a place to start, right? There's me, there's my aggregates, there's my sense generation, there are the causes and effects that come from different motives and actions, right? He taught all of these as existing for the purpose of ripening people like me in you to the point that we could say, hey, wait, this cyclic existence is no fun. I get out. How do I help other people find a way and exit from constant cycling and suffering? So, so for that intent, he taught me in mine. He also taught, like that, he taught Bungbo, which are the aggregates. He taught they're real aggregates. Kam, they're real dhatus, spheres of experience, the 18 dhatus of sight, faculty, consciousness of sights, and with the other sense faculties and with mind. And he taught Geche, the generators of sensory experience. All those things he taught as real. Daishin, Gupe, um, hmm, Gupe. For some reason, I wrote in my notes Gombe. But anyway, similarly, out of necessity, this means out of necessity, influenced by that necessity of teaching those things, he spoke of the heaps, the dhatus, and sense generators. So there's a word in Tibetan that Art defined as he was giving the translation of this commentary by Gyime Khenpo Rinpoche called Tanye. You might see it at Ta and then Ye, and it means ordinary parlance. And I mentioned that before, right? So ordinarily you could say there is a me, and that's where I went to this infant that my parents named Wilson, right? That label um, can be said to be true, right? There was really this little baby that they called Wilson, and then they fed it, and then it became this person who walks around and talks and all that. So, from a relative point of view, there's a you, there's a me, there's yours and what you have, me and what I have. There's the world, there are all the people in the world. All that can be said at a relative level to be true. Um, and with the intention of teaching renunciation and bodhicitta and correct action and all that stuff, Buddha used those terms. Um, the term I was mentioning, Tanye, there's a little Tibetan phrase, Tanye shushe ki tsema. Tsema, Tanye shushe ki sema. Tsema, tsema means valid, genuine, valid. And it's a term in debate. There's correct cognition, correct logic, and all of those are called sema. So, how is calling that little baby Wilson as a person valid? In the conventions of the world, everybody agreed, oh, there's a baby there, and that's the name that the parents gave the baby, and so that's real, right? But if you stop there with convention, that's conventional truth, then that's where the problem starts, right? If you just start, oh yeah, there's a real Wilson and there's a real, that's his house, that's his, right? There's a real me, there's a real mine. If you just stop there, then what happens when something threatens what you perceive as yours? What emotions go through your mind? Or what emotions occur when you think, well, I'm kind of not feeling good and I want something more. And you start referring to that relative sense of me as if it really exists, then the problem starts. and all the afflictions start, and all the actions based on those afflictions start, and you start collecting karma, and the whole world starts churning round with all its suffering for you. So that was what um, Buddha used those terms to get people to that renunciation place. But then when he saw that somebody was ready, that's when he started saying, yeah, but if is it really a you? Let's take a look at that. What is the real you? Would you please show me what is that real you? What is really the color of your mind? What is your mind? Right? And he kind of turned the spotlight back around on the suppositions that we carry from those conventional uses of those words. And he started to show that underneath it all, at an ultimate level, there never really was a Wilson from his own side. That was a mixture of factors and causes and conditions that got a label on it. And from an ultimate point of view, um, there really isn't a Wilson, which gets to the Zen's question, what's your original face? Who were you before you were born? And it gets a little scary because you can start, as you start thinking this way and you look into the depths of your mind, you realize all the stuff I've been putting so much importance to really doesn't have a true nature to it, right? It's not really there in an ultimate sense. And that's where I started, that when I die, all that's going to be wiped out. It's going to be gone. And what's going to continue? All the karmic causes that false sense of me put into motion. And then that's going to ripen in different ways. And some other um, being with the same continuum as this current continuum is going to reap the consequences. And that's really scary. Um, all right, so this one gets into taking apart that false sense of self. Jua Che means the great elements. And this is just looking at our forms, right? The four great elements of earth, water, fire, air. And you could add space. La Sok, Sherpa, the Buddha taught on the great elements. Um, Namparche, uh, Suyangdatu, um, all of them are collected. Du means collected. Yangdak means thoroughly or perfectly into consciousness. And this gets into deep philosophical debates. At Nagarjuna's time, there was no mind-only school, and there was no Madhyamaka per se. He was talking it out against the Samkhya school and the Vaibhashika school. Those were the two school systems he was refuting with this dissertation of the 60 verses. But later, um, as those other two higher schools of mind only and Madhyamaka arose, they came back to this verse and they put a lot of emphasis on it. And you can imagine the mind only school and why they use this verse a lot. So all the great elements are subsumed within consciousness. What does that mean? What do you think that means? So right now you're thinking about this or not, or you're trying to, and you're listening, right? And you're perceiving things with your eyes, with your ears. Um, what is it that's perceiving them? Isn't it ultimately your consciousness? Is there any way for you to know anything? that's not filtered through your awareness? Isn't it true that each moment your mind is involved in constructing your ideas about reality? So we can't know any of those elements without having them filtered through the mind. Um, Shepe, um, by the knowledge of that, Drelgirna, you can become freed. That knowledge itself can free you from the afflictions. Lokbar Namtak, Lokbar means false. Namtak means mental conceptions or constructions. Mayana, aren't they? Aren't all your constructions about reality therefore false? If everything is filtered through your mind and is really just constructs filtered through your mind, how can you claim that your version of reality is not false, is not built on insubstantial ground, the whole of the world and all of its problems? Now, I know that sounds a little bit difficult, but I'll break it down in how it breaks down into the two higher schools I mentioned of mind only and Madhyamaka. So these are comments that Yume Kensur Rinpoche made, and that also are in Chantakirti's um, commentary to this verse. So the Chitta Mantra, the mind only school, because of realizing that the mind is really the thing that we filter all our sense of reality through, they started to deny the external world, that the external world even exists. Um, and that it's never separate from the mind. So on that point, the mind only and the Madhyamaka, as defined by Chandrakirti, agree that we cannot separate any knowledge of the world from our minds. Scientists cannot separate their discovery of truths from their own minds because it's all filtered through mind. So those two schools agree on that point. But the mind only school is defined by Shankarakshita, held that from the level of relative truth, the external world doesn't exist at all. That's like subsist almost. That point of view is subsist. That's based on the Yogacarya view. Um, Chantakirti did not agree with that. This is where the Madhyamaka school took exception to that tenet in the Yogacarya school. They agree that the world um, doesn't exist at some ultimate level of truth, um, whereas its relative appearances are based on the lack of self, nature, and dependent origination. Therefore, relative truths exist, but not inherently. So that's the middle way school, the Madhyamaka. Um, Sita, on the other hand, accepts that the mental substance that dualistically sees subject and objective worlds. Um, but Sita thought that the mind that perceives myself and the world exists truly. He thought that that exists truly. But John Chandrasekhar, um, Chandrakirti, I'm sorry, Chandrakirti said no, that there's not even a self-existence to that mind, that dualistic mind perceiving oneself in the world. Um, he notes that all perceived phenomena necessarily have a dependent nature with the mind perceiving them. Right, so that's how those two schools see this verse a little differently. Did I thoroughly confuse you, or is that make sense? Okay.
If you could state the last statement again, I would really appreciate it.
Sure. That's Chandrakirti's view.
Hmm.
He refutes the idea that the mind that has that subject object duality, he refutes the idea that that mind truly exists. He does acknowledge that all perceived phenomena necessarily have a dependent relationship with the mind that perceives them, but he does not show he refuted the idea that there's an inherent nature to that mind in that continuum of mind.
Yeah, that's pretty subtle, but there's a big difference. Thank
And
you.
it's, and it's really important from the point of view of liberation,
Hmm.
because as I said, when you start really looking into the self, well, go ahead.
Okay, so, being Buddhist, I know there's all types of minds, the names for minds. So when we're speaking mind here, what are we speaking consciousness? Is that what you're speaking about?
All levels of mind, and you're right, there are different levels of it. The mind-only school developed a theory, they called it the Alaya Vijnana, which is the storehouse consciousness that carries the karmic seeds from life to life. And they said that that had inherent nature to it. And then for the dualistic mind, they developed another level of mind. They labeled another level of mind that's fooled by the dualistic appearance of things. And they saw that as a deceptive level of mind. Um, so they broke things down that way. The Chandrakirti and the middle way philosophers didn't delineate those two levels. Um, they saw different levels of mind. There's a gross mind, which operates through our sense faculties and then our perceptions of ourselves in the world. There's a more subtle mind that becomes active when you're asleep and dreaming. And then they saw, in an esoteric sense, a most subtle level of the mind that happens when we die, that we get in touch with when we die. But all of those levels of mind, from the middle way point of view, arise in dependence from a previous moment that's of a mental nature. And therefore, the mind is thoroughly dependent. There's nothing independent about it. This moment of mind depends on previous moments of mind and so far back to infinity. But they still maintain that never has the mind had self-nature to it, and never will it, nor could it. And it's because we deceive ourselves and we think there's a self to it that we create karma and suffering that are needless. That if we could stay with the true nature of our minds and the lack of self-existence of our minds and our worlds, we could free ourselves and no longer experience suffering. So that's
That was really interesting. I really picked up a subtle difference there. Thank you.
sure. It's interesting stuff. So how are we doing on time? Should I delve into one more? Okay. Let me try this one. Oh, um, Rinpoche in his commentary, he got into interesting um, phenomena that actually is agreed to by all the schools, like Bhashika school, which um, the Abhidharma, kosha was written from the Vaibhashika point of view, all the way up through Madhyamaka view. There's a thing that's called non-expressive form. And um, it's a it's a sense that the mind, when let's say we do something virtuous, or we take a vow, for example, that there's a non-expressive form to that vow that stays with our mental continuum as long as we keep the vow, and that has influence over us. Um, and then they have another kind of form that's non-expressive form. Expressive form is when an emotion or an impulse can be seen by how we're conducting ourselves. Like, for instance, when you take a vow and you kneel a certain way, and that's an expressive form of that impulse. But then things also have a non-expressive form. All right, so the next verse,
Oh, can I ask why was that important?
why you brought it up there?
Yeah, I didn't mean that it's not important. I just meant why.
Okay, well, let me, um, okay, well, it's good because there's some commentary here and we would have missed it if you didn't ask that. All right, so I'll just read it. I'll read it to you so you can see the flow of what Rinpoche was talking about. Every substance create, this is according to the Vaibhashika school, has four great elements: earth, water, fire, air, arising as rising as secondary elements, allowing for sight, sound, smell, taste, and tangibles. So this is getting into that school of thought. So there are 11 types of form in that school system. Five objects of the senses, the special sense faculties, and then non-expressive forms. That's the 11th. That's how that came up.
Yeah, sorry, I probably wasn't paying attention. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't read this part of it, but it goes on, and I think it's probably useful since since we opened it up to go on. They all appear to the mind in different ways, so can be subsumed into mind. They can all be subsumed into mind. Therefore, there is no physical world separate from mind. Realize this um, con- lends to a deeper contentless awareness free of concepts of self-nature. And this is you can find this in Zen writings. When you're in the middle of something and you're experiencing it and you're having a reaction, there's a technique in the Zen school to pause and look at what is it that's experiencing this moment. And so you're kind of reflecting back inward to try to access the awareness behind the experience. And that's very similar. You're, if you start to rest back into the clarity of the awareness, it helps you let go of all the getting embroiled with your reactions. And that's a good step to do in terms of practice. Things like a red face when you're angry are called expressive forms. But the aspect of your being that subtly changes your body from carrying vows and the like, or being intent on the other side, that's a wholesome thing. On the other side, if you're intent on a non-virtuous act, that also has a non-expressive form that has influence over your mind and body. Um, or if you've committed misdeeds, then that becomes a non-expressive form. In that they alter your being in unobservable ways from the outside. Realists hold that each atom is a complete composite of the four main elements, earth, water, fire, air, along with four secondary elements capable of generating sound, sight, smell, taste, and tangible sensation. The way they are configured Um, in each atom depends how they manifest. This is again Vaibhashika's school system. So according to them, there are at least 8 substances and they change moment to moment. So a little different than the Madhyamaka view. But it's a valid school system of Buddhism. All right, so back to this verse. This is where we still have a few minutes. This is where Nagarjuna is going to scriptural authority for what he's been saying. And this is actually a very good place to stop today's class. Young and De, young and Depa is a word for nirvana, beyond the experience of suffering. Then the truth of that, Chikbur, that is the sole truth. Gyawan Namgi, by all the victorious ones, Kong Sumba, they said that. The only real reality is nirvana, the state beyond all suffering, because everything else is conditioned and fluctuating. They say at the time that you realize that, that um, everything is not self-existent, and so it's in the nature of nirvana. When you realize that, Lakma, everything that's left over, Lok Min, saying that it's not false, Kepa Sushik Tokpar J, what scholar or intelligent a person would assert that? If the sole true nature is lack of inherent existence, which is the nature of nirvana when you perceive it directly and thoroughly, who would say that what left over is not false? So that's how the world is seen as false. It's not true. It's all dependently arisen. It's like a magician's show. We're concocting based on ignorance and then the actions that come out of ignorance. So anyway, I think this is probably a good place to stop. Um, give you hope for all of you who are despairing about the state of the world, that there's a state beyond the world that we can shoot for. Okay. Sorry, Boogie, Georgie, Meadow, Dom, Rewriting, Jenny, and again, Badia, Sange, Jing, do Midday, Wagi, Dogu, Nanda, Jing, Ajubajo, Idan Guru, Rana, Mandala, Kamni, Yatayami. Gewadi, Gewogun, Sunami, Eches, also Chin, Sunami, Echelation, where Dambogun, Dobashu. Donju Zanjo Rinpoche, Ma Ye Bana Gegeji, Yaban Yamba Me Bayang, Gone Gondu Baosho, Gari Ro Eko, Echingande, Bendande, Wamalu, Juene, Genrezi, Wandens, and Gazo Ye, Shabe Site, Badu, Deng Yor Chi. All right.
Awesome class. Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
Wilson. So great to go over this with you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson.
Thanks for
Thank you
your,
for the questions too, guys.
yeah,
Yay.
Thanks
it
so
helps.
much.
The
Live long,
questions
keep
really help.
teaching.
Take care of yourself and live long, Wilson.
You too,
Yay.
sir.